um, to entering an agreement to spending any money on behalf of the water department, or we're simply telling the select board, we think it's a good idea, we think you should approve it.
Yes, there's no commitment, there's no money required, and I'll explain why. So
Okay.
it's just we're at the stage where we can't do a contract because we don't know enough.
Okay.
And in the case of the water plant, we think this is a great site, but we'd like to have the developer at their own cost move forward with designing it. And if it's not economic, if it doesn't make sense, if we can't get approvals, then we won't be able to pursue it. But simply by giving an award and saying that we will continue negotiations with you with the intent of potentially entering into a contract, if that makes economic sense, we're able to lock in some of the benefits that otherwise expire before the end of the year. So we are here, which is at the award of the contract. Once we give a letter that says we award the contract for, not the contract, we award this site to you, the developer can then start moving down the path of additional design and details that we then can decide, do we contract or not contract? Are the savings enough or not enough? So that negotiation, we, the evaluation committee and the alternative energy committee, have no authority to proceed after the RFP gets to the point where we make our recommendation. So this is where we're looking for support of an award to learn more. And there are some important dates by the end of this year when some of those incentives expire. That doesn't mean there won't be more incentives going forward, but we do know that there are some that we have currently today that could make some of these sites very economic. So we had a very successful request for proposal process. We received proposals from 9 bidders. Of those 9 bidders, the evaluation committee recommends moving forward with 3 of them. Those 3 would be focused on different types of sites, and we'll talk about each of those in a moment. Ameresco would be who we would choose to go forward with in the negotiations for the schools. Palmer Capital has identified a bunch of third-party sites, as well as the DPW site where they currently have a solar energy array. And Select Energy is the interesting party that we would recommend look at the water plant site. And we'll explain to you why in a moment. Those 9 bidders looked at 16 different sites, and these sites offered 5 to 9 times more energy than what the town's municipal load requires. And because it provided so much energy, we started to look at the enterprise funds as being a potential beneficiary of the credits and the savings that could come from moving forward with solar. Because right now, with the cost savings that have occurred with solar combined with the incentives on the state and federal level, we would get savings. We'd be projected to get savings of about 10 to 25% of the total electricity bill. And for the Water Commission, your total electricity bill, I think last year was around $125,000. So that could be some sizable savings on 10 to 25% of that. So we received some great price transparency about what sites would cost, what would work. We stacked them in order from most beneficial for savings to least beneficial. And perhaps no surprise, the third-party sites are the least economic for us because you have to pay somebody else the lease payment. Whereas with the town sites, we can get that lease payment either in the form of lease payment or in the form of higher savings for the electricity bill credits. The DPW site and the school roofs, unfortunately, are difficult. That's just the reality. The DPW site has some restrictions on it. It's always hard to get a post-closure use permit. We already have it for the existing array. We've asked Palmer Capital to take a look at whether or not we could expand on that site. We have a study undergoing right now about that site, but it currently is tripping. The inverters are tripping for some reason, and it might be the interconnection. So there could be some capital costs that make that uneconomic. The school roofs, it's just bad timing, unfortunately. We knew this going into it. It's bad timing. The school roofs are going to be replaced in 5 to 10 years. So it's difficult to justify putting a solar energy array on the roofs. Parking canopies at the schools or in the town sites do provide some nice economics. It's just a question of, is the town willing to go forward with that aesthetic? and then the other town sites, which would include the water plant. And we're going to talk about why the water plant was intriguing to us and to the developers in a moment. But we wanted to talk to you about this because the water plant site has some potential that we'd like to discuss with you. So when we look at what would we be aiming to procure, the existing landfill and the school carports could be used for the town buildings and the schools. Other public sites such as the water plant, or private sites such as the Stop and Shop Center, which was identified by Palmer Capital. Those could be some of the areas that we pursued to get the incremental amount of savings that would accrue to the water and sewer enterprise funds. And, you know, we have to be careful we don't over procure, otherwise we could end up having too much and no place to put it against our bill, because these are credits that have to go against our electricity bill. So we're targeting a little bit less, but again, we have included in our, and this isn't anything, nothing's in stone, this was just what we discovered when we got these responses to the request for proposal, is there's a lot of potential savings. And like I said, it's about 10 to 25% of the total electricity bill. A lot of potential savings, more than the municipal load with respect to the school buildings and the town buildings. So we started to look at the enterprise funds. And here's how it sort of breaks out. The town buildings can be serviced from the existing landfill. The school carports could service 60 to 70% of the school load. And then we would look at potentially the water plant, other town sites, other private sites for the enterprise funds. And keep some headroom in case we end up having energy efficiency over the next 20 years, or prices go in a way where we can't use the solar energy that we purchased. So that's sort of conceptually how we were able to think about how do we maximize total value to the town. Obviously, you can see with enterprise funds, there's potential savings for you if you're amenable, if you're interested. And we wanted to talk to you about this because you spend, based on our analysis of the electricity bills, about $125,000 per year on electricity costs. And so we're looking to be able to save you $10,000 to $25,000 of that, if not more. So the recommendation from the evaluation committee was to pursue 3 buckets of sites with 3 different companies. We can do this. There's no reason to use the same one. Our recommendations based on what they bid on and what the prices that they provided. So for the schools, we are recommending going forward with negotiations with Ameresco. We did receive school committee approval to pursue negotiations last week, which we're very excited about. For the public sites, and this includes the water plant, we would look to go with Select Energy. Select Energy has another interesting position in that they have a little bit more flexibility to develop sites outside of a 30B procurement process, if that's what we chose to do. And then the private sites would be, we'd move forward with Palmer Capital, and we continue to encourage them to look at the existing DPW site to identify savings. So just to show you what the other sites look like in the context of the Water Commission, the water plant, the schools cannot have solar put on the roofs right now because of how old the roofs are, but there's a potential to do carports. The school committee has to approve it. There is some obvious concern about the aesthetics as well as safety and other items, but that is the most lucrative way for us to get savings directly feeding it into the school. With respect to the water plant site, and I want to focus on this a little bit longer, there's different places where we could put solar. The school roofs was actually identified, and that's where you could get savings of about 20% if we were to put on the rooftops, 20% of that portion of the bill, but it's small. It's only 80 kilowatts. So it doesn't come anywhere near meeting your total needs. There's a potential to put parking canopies, which because of subsidies happen to be pretty much on par with roofs, to put some parking canopies in the parking lot if you're amenable to that. Maybe there's some areas around the sludge pits. Steve told me you can't put it on top of the sludge pits. You have to be careful it doesn't mess up with operations. We totally get that. And then the nice thing about the water plant site, it is right by the feeder line that comes through Wampatuck Park. That tends to be the reason a majority of the times why the town's electricity goes out. And so by putting a large power plant or power generator here, ideally in this case solar, but there might be other solutions that we'd want to look at, you could tap right into that line, and we know that it'd be a low cost interconnection because it's a pretty sizable line that could absorb for sure whatever we would put on the water plant site. So you may remember, I'm sure Lee does, that I stood before the town after successfully getting approval to go to a request for proposal process for the school roofs and for the landfill, and asked for permission to go out to developers to find out what they would do at the water site. And it was voted down in 2012. And I think the reason why it was voted down was because we didn't have a plan, but we were saying, give us permission to lease the site and we'll go get a plan. And then it has to go through the process. The select board has to approve it. You'd have to go to the planning committee. The water commission would have to approve it. It didn't matter. There was a chicken egg problem. It got voted down. What we would be able to do today, because of the way that the state rules are set up, is we could move forward with having a developer sort of plan out what the design would look like. And to do that, all we need, because we've already gone through the process for an award, all we would need is basically your support and the select board's approval to proceed with negotiations. That would allow the developer to put us in the queue and then start the design process about what and where the solar energy arrays would go. And we would obviously want to have the water commission, if you want to pursue this, be very involved. At that point, we could go back to the town and ask for approval to lease. But under one of the Massachusetts general laws for renewable sites, you don't need to, but that's a political decision. So we could still move forward today without having the pre-approval of the town to lease this site, have the developer put in the development dollars to go forward with trying to design where and how much solar could be put on the site, and then come back with a recommendation as part of our negotiation process. This is a little bit fresh and new because we did not ask the town for approval to lease the site in June, but it was identified by the developers as a potential site where we could do solar energy. I'll stop here. I'm almost done with the rest of the context, but I guess, you know, this is your site. So we have identified it as a potential site. We've identified the potential savings for the water commission and the water plant. We wanted to bring it to your attention, but as I said at the very beginning, the evaluation committee and the alternative energy committee can't move forward with anything unless we have the go-ahead to do so.
Okay, well, Tanya, I remember back in 2012, the objection was the roof because it was non-aesthetic and would produce glare for the neighbors. That was the type of thing they were looking at. From my point of view now, because we're going through the facility study, I would prefer to have something that is not on a building, because we don't know what we're going to be doing with the building. So that, you know, because it could mess things up. And I do like the proposal to look onto the surrounding area to put a land mount. That seems the most prudent way to go through this.
Yeah, and the land mounts are the cheapest and potentially the most lucrative. And if we go above a certain size, we can go up to 500 kW, which is what the solar energy array is, the size of the solar energy array. So you can see that's about 1.5 acres, I think.
Mm-hmm.
we could go up to that level without requiring a battery. But if we go above that, under the rules, we would have to include a battery, and the economics start to go down a little bit. But we could also feed that directly into whatever your new building is, and even eventually, potentially, as a resource to service the entire town by tapping into that feeder line. So again, we're open, looking for direction, seeing if there's interest on your part, but we wanted to bring to you what we've learned from the bidders who have already bid, and what more we could learn if we were able to move forward with negotiations and design. It's not just negotiations. We don't even have a design yet.
Mm-hmm.
So Tanya, first of all, I just want to thank you for dedicating all this time and energy into such a great cause. I think it's a good idea, and my only concern is similar to Lee's, is that we are still looking at our site, and at some point down the road, we're going to need a new water treatment plant, which may involve expanding our water source or sludge lagoons. And so we just have to be careful that we don't commit to something that could impede our future plans for the plant. But if we're not committing to anything, and we're not committing to spend any money, and we can pull out if we decide this is going to interfere with us going forward, I'm for it. I don't think well, it depends on where it is. I mean, I think, the question I would have is, legally, who is it the water department or the Board of Selectmen who has ultimate say on this? And does it need to go to town meeting? I don't know the answers to that. I'm thinking it's probably the select board that would have ultimate say on this. And do you know if that's going to town meeting again?
So there's a way to move forward with this under Mass General Law 164, Section 137, which carves out an exemption to the town meeting Chapter 30B process if it is for purposes of municipal renewables. Select Energy is an entity who's very familiar with that approach, which is why we would choose to move forward with them to give us that option. But it may be, even though legally we don't have to go back to town meeting, that the select board does want to go back to town meeting just to get the approval of the town. So we don't legally have to if we move forward with Select Energy under Mass General Law 164, but politically, somebody well above my pay grade would have to make the decision about whether or not, we do want to go back to the town to tell them what the proposal is and get their vote.
Okay.
Well, how long do you foresee it would take to develop a proposal for this site?
Oh, I don't think long. I think by giving a letter of award, and let me show you what that looks like so you can see, these are some of the third-party sites that we are recommending Palmer Capital proceed with. These sites are interesting to you because if there are savings, that could get allocated to your electricity bill, if you agree. This is an example of a letter, a memorandum of understanding between the town of Cohasset and the developer. And it basically just says we are awarding you, we get to move forward with negotiations. But if you look at, I think, paragraph 6, it very clearly says either party may terminate this MOU at any time for no cost with no penalties. So there's no commitment. It's just simply a letter saying we are awarding you, whoever the developer is, and our recommendation for the water plant site is Select Energy. We're awarding you the ability to move forward with negotiations, design, details. I think they could probably turn something around in a month. And then there's a longer process for interconnection. But again, this is a perfect site in town to tap into the lines because the large feeder line is right there. So I think that it wouldn't be costly to tap into the lines because of the capacity that's available. And that's unlike most of the other locations in town. So once we do get that interconnection study from National Grid, we then can try to get some of the more lucrative benefits. If those end up running out, we're still in queue to get what's called the alternative on bill credits under the Smart 2.0 program. So there's two pots of money. We're going to try to go after the rich pot of money, but if we don't get that, we can still get the 10% savings or more by just simply giving them an award letter before the end of the year and letting them move forward in the queue.
Tom,
All right,
did you
so
know-
from us today, you would need to get a go-ahead to go forward with this letter?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to present to the select board on Thursday. So from you, the Water Commission, and I know this is hopefully not the first time you're hearing about it because Steve's on your commission, but we would basically just be looking for some vote of support. And if you don't want to support, that's fine. We're happy to find out, no, this is a non-starter. And I think your comments about we don't want to put anything on the roof is a very good piece of feedback because we can tell the developer, look at alternative designs. And that's a small piece anyway, to be honest with you. It's less than 20% of what we'd anticipate for that site.
So one of the things that we had so there was a group of us, with Chris and Diane and Kerry and Tanya, myself, and this few other folks. They really want to go kind of really look at many avenues with the town because we are on the feeder lines that come through town are rated number 2 and 3 of the worst in the state. So
2 and 4, yeah.
So we're looking. So we're all looking together on how to amplify the system so we have less outages. Obviously, you can't help anything downstream from where we are, but the areas I looked at was more in the wooded areas near the feeder lines, so not into the operation area. So folks like Jason, Carl, if any questions or concerns, you should ask Tanya. Well, she's here.
I do. I mentioned it to Michelle yesterday. I know that they were going to reach out. Potential contamination is my biggest concern, even more than operational. As we know, PFAS was an unknown contaminant 5 years ago, and now it's we're being regulated down to the parts per trillion. So my fear would be anything that we put there is a potential source of contaminant, either being a contaminant we know about currently that's regulated or a future unregulated contaminant, and who would be responsible if in 40 years this determined something that was on there is now a contaminant, who's responsible for cleaning that up.
Good point.
Steve, I don't know, did you want to address that? Steve Girardi?
To it, the only thing is I'm not a chemical guy, so I don't really know 100%. But these are the questions you can ask Select, and actually they could provide a basic material list. Like for instance, like I know transformers with near waterways would be filled with vegetable oil, which they're not contaminating. So at least I know that part. We should, it depends on which way we go. You would ask for material list and what's in it. Then they would have to do the research and provide the details.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
Another thing that we might be concerned with contamination is if there is a breakdown somehow of the parts that would leach anything into the water supply. Because I'm not sure what is involved in making any of the solar.
So there is stuff in the solar panels at the NMP layers, which produces electricity. So you're not supposed to break the glass. However, I think as time evolved, some of those chemicals are gone. I'm not I'm not a solar professional, but those are the questions you would ask of the manufacturer of the equipment. So I know they got green water stuff, and there's a lot of stuff out there. Those are the questions you have to ask.
Right, I can say to the point that's been made by Jason Lee, say that we get some kind of crazy storm and these things get torn up and broken. Could there be a leak of some contamination into the ground or to the water? I don't know.
Yeah, again, I think that the developer would look at the design and would make a determination, and we could most certainly express our concern. I think by keeping it at 500 kW or below and not moving to a battery, the battery has lithium, the battery might have other chemicals. The batteries have, there's still new technology. So it may be that we find the combination of the battery and the solar is not something we want to move forward with, but that we could still move forward with the solar because the potential contamination risk is de minimis. But that most certainly is more research that can be done, and the developer can help us do that, as well as the Alternative Energy Committee.
So like adding a membrane to the ground area, so if there's any issues, it'd be contained.
Yeah, and then we also could probably put in a buffer, so if anything is flowing on a downhill, like a buffer filter.
Yep.
So we did go back to Select yesterday and just ask them some high level questions that could address some of these concerns at a high level. But obviously, if we issued a letter of intent, they would look into it further with the material list and things of that nature.
So the letter of intent will allow a kick-out clause if it was a no-go.
The letter of intent is a non-binding agreement.
Okay.
Who would sign it? Would it, on behalf of the town, who would sign it? Would it be Lee as the chair of the Water Commission? Would it be Chris Senior? Would it be someone from the select board? Do you know?
So, yeah, it would be Chris Senior, and if your board wanted to sign off on it, absolutely, you would have the choice to be a co-signer on the agreement.
I think I don't think we have anything to lose by exploring it. And there's good potential savings, and also it's good for the environment.
I totally agree, so I think we
Yeah.
probably, does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Oh, go ahead, Steve. You can do it.
You go ahead. I let the senior folks go first. I mean, you guys
All
are
right.
more. You guys are
I make a motion that we give our approval to moving forward to explore further the possibility of having solar panels somewhere on the Water Commission or the Water Department site.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, only question is, do we have to mention anything about the agreement in it? Tanya?
No, because the select board would have to, I think, give approval to move forward with this. I think moving forward, as you described it, gives the select board what they need to feel comfort that we've talked to you and that you support this. But
Okay, well,
Michelle, you might have a better idea. Do you agree?
I'm sorry, I actually missed the question.
So the question is, what do we need from the Water Commission? Is simply their support to move forward with negotiations with a developer, or to award the ability to move forward with a developer in negotiations? Is that enough, or do we need to talk about a letter of intent or an award letter?
No, I think just the vote of the board today to give the selectmen the comfort level that you would like to also explore the piece at the water department, I think is sufficient.
okay, well, that sounds fine. So we have the motion on the table. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is passed unanimously.
Excellent. Well, we can go on to the next step to try to save you money.
Good.
So-
Thank you, Tanya.
Always what
We
we're
look
looking
forward to working with you. Thank you.
I'm here.
Tanya,
for.
really
Thank you
try
for
to
your
get
time today.
really try to get those material lists going. Okay, that's going to be key. Okay.
I hear you. So we definitely will let them know. But I think we'll have some meetings with the Water Commission as introduce Select Energy to you, let them get a whole tour of the site, and you can then talk about some of the constraints and concerns you have. So you'll be able to speak with Select directly.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Water Commission. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Welcome.
We're moving on now to our rate study. Jason,
Hello, let me get this thing opened up.
Did I make you co-host to the right one?
I'll tell you in a second. Yep, you did.
Okay, good.
So I sent
Professor
this off.
Jason.
I sent this off to everybody and met with each of you to discuss these options. We've actually made some other changes. Both Don and myself sat down and went through it again. Actually, after I met with everybody, we had some issues with some of the expense calculations that were done. So we redid expense calculations. We broke it out the way we currently budget versus the way he was doing it, where he was kind of lumping things together. He had lumped together engineering and Woodard and Curran. So it didn't make sense the way we look at things and how we would increase costs moving forward. In here for assumptions, we put in Woodard's current or the price for next year. We started escalating it for the next 2 years at 3% just to get to a point where we'd have a larger number in when the contract comes up again they're generally increasing at about 3%. Actually, I think we calculated it was 5% for 3 years, so it's a little less than 3%. So we're being a little bit more conservative in what that increase will be by the time we get to the next contract. And we also added in the GAC maintenance cost into that expense line. So that affected these values slightly. So given that and all the backup information, it would look like if we did nothing and we just kept going, we could survive another 2 years theoretically before we ran out of money with the existing capital plan in place. So that's part of the good news. The bad news, the one we had looked at the last time, really looks bad now. If we keep the rate structure the way it is currently, we'd have to go up by 10%, 10%, 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5 to balance the budget. If we go to a alternate B, I made a change to alternate B after I met with all of you. In the fear in that one was changing the rate for a 1-inch meter versus the 5/8 inch. So in this scenario now, I've made the 1-inch meter and the 5/8 meter the same base rate, and then just escalated the remaining rates from there accordingly. And then in the final option, I took, and this is the third tier option where you have anything over 5,000 cubic feet would be billed at a higher tier. So when you get into that, well, first off, the other issue with that alternative B is if you have an 1.5 inch meter, you're then going to ask the question, should I go down to a smaller size meter? And same with the 2. It may end up making work for the staff and in losing money at the same time. So that's kind of a catch-22 on that one as being an issue as well. And in this, the tier 3 ends up being 2.6 times the existing tier 2. So it would be 1329 per 100 cubic feet for that third tier. We made no changes to the CIP since I talked to you guys all. User impacts for an average customer, somebody who uses 65 gallons per capita per day, in an average size household. You have, these are your changes in, you have an increase on that one, the option 1 of $39 the first year, option 2 is $9, and an average customer actually would see no increase in year 1, and then they subsequently go up. And everything looks okay as far as complying with median household income concerns.
Jason, right now we have the capital recovery charge. Will we have a base fee under these alternatives?
Yes, so it switched to a base fee.
And that's based, okay. I know that was based upon the meter size in alternative B. You have the same in alternative C?
All of them are based on the meter size. So on
Okay.
alternate C, we keep the same setup for that base rate. So
I got
5/8, 1 inch, 1.5 inches, all pay 170. Then it jumps up and up from there.
Okay,
But that's basically what we've had already.
Yeah, it's just it then increases based on. It's just a percent increase based on that afterwards, moving forward.
are we calling it a base fee or are we calling it a base fee? Okay.
We're getting rid of recovery charge.
Yes.
Yep.
That might be a problem calling it a base fee because in order to describe it.
Base service charge.
I don't know. How about capital service charge?
It doesn't cover just capital though. We'd have to look at what the income is and determine if what portion of this rate covers operating expenses versus capital expenses.
Well, considering the recovery charge wasn't covering the recovery and the capital expenses were covering the loans. I don't know if we have reached that point in the capital recovery charge where it totally covers what the loans have been.
I gotta look at what's our operating budget right now. So we're at 2.8 and you would be looking at 2.4. So you're still not covering. I'd have to decrease the base rate and increase the usage charge to make the base rate an actual capital recovery charge because you're not covering the operating costs. You're covering part of the operating costs with the base cost.
Jason, what was that calculation you just did? What were
I
you
just
comparing?
I just added up what would be the tiered amount of money made, Don,
Yep.
and that's 2.2 as compared to expenses. So we're at operating expenses of 2.8.
I gotcha.
And therefore, if you want to call that number a capital recovery charge, then we have to decrease that number and increase the fees, and then monkey around in the long term with that base charge and change it to cover the debt service as needed.
I would suggest, I mean, I'm not wedded to base fee. I think we had discussed this a lot previously, and that's where we ended up. But if, I think it's the same thing no matter what we call it. I think it's more selling it to the town as to what it is at town meeting. But I do think it should cover more than just capital. It should cover our expenses.
See, but we have other things to cover our expenses too, besides just the rates, because don't forget, we have the Linden Ponds, we have hookups, we have the rentals, and we have the hydrant fees. So did you consider those when those
we're
numbers you
looking
just
at it.
showed us?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I just
Right,
didn't
because
put
those would
the
all,
rates.
you're right, Lee. That would be covering operational costs, really, a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's basically what we considered in covering operational costs, plus whatever the liens and whatever interest we get.
Right.
Correct.
But are we gonna get, I guess we could look, I could look at all those different revenue sources. So you have you'd have an additional 300 Linden Pond, so it's 600 there. So yes, you could cover it with that. It could be called the capital recovery fee. And there's no base charge, then you're paying entirely your money. But we'd have, I mean, if you really wanted to do it, we'd have, and make sure it works, we'd have to look at it long-term and make sure that the numbers jive with operating costs versus capital and debt service costs, and make sure that those, it wouldn't necessarily be a 2.5, and make Brenda's head explode, because we're gonna vary rates from rate increases there might be a change in a rate for the usage and not a change in a rate for the capital recovery charge in a year. And then a different year, there might be a change in a base rate or a capital recovery charge and no change in a rate.
Can we call it just like, instead of capital recovery, like capital and operation fee or something?
Or capital improvement or capital sustainability.
Fine with any of that.
Yeah, capital improvement sounds actually good.
That sounds good. And that way we're not tying it. It's kind of a little more open-ended. And we don't have to make all the adjustments I think, Jason, you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then Jason, we're only looking at 5 years. So
Yeah.
I think, if we just do this for, you could go out 10, but we're basically doing every 5 years.
Yep.
So we'll see where we are at that point, because we don't know what else is coming down the road. We take a look at how we have our capital plan and how that always gets adjusted depending on whatever. Because, we don't know when the state's going to be able to do the work on 3A going from Beechwood to the Situate line. And we don't know whether or not there are any other possibilities coming in, new regulations. So, we're sort of fluid, as they say.
Yeah. So Jason, am I correct that you are recommending that we approve alternative C?
I think at the next meeting, I would say we should move forward with 3. I got to go through the numbers one more time with Dawn, make sure everything's good before we officially say 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. Well, 0, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. With a
Right,
third.
Jason, because when we just looked, operation expenses increase, that's what we need to really look at these numbers again. Because we spent the time, we broke it down based on kind of how we budget. We broke it down, so these are operating expenses. Then we have capital expenses, which are our debt service or our items that we might pay with retained earnings, right? Just looking at operations alone, in FY22, that's 8.4%, then to 14.1% the next year to cover, based on our current budget of 21, right? So you look at FY21, 2.3 million for operating, then goes up to 2.5 in 22, almost 9 in 23, and then it evens out to an even 2.9. So we really need to look at this before we just make a decision of 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, because that's not going to cover those big increases if we just do 2.5%. And if we're still trying to be conservative in our budgeting, I definitely think we want to look at this, because again, we weren't 100% loving what Mike put together. And I heard you say running out of money in a certain year. I don't think we should plan this rate based on spending down all our retained earnings or a point of when we run out of money.
No, this
We
was
should
done.
look at budgetarily, where are we now?
Yeah.
Knowing that we're conservative, because that's what we want to be flexible in the years that maybe a bigger project comes in that we weren't anticipating that needs to be paid out of cash, or something that needs to be borrowed that, gets moved up a year. I think having some flexibility is going to help us. So
John, the only one
we need to look at these numbers before we just make a decision on that, on that alternative 3.
The only one we ran out of money on is if we do nothing. Everything else,
Right.
I increased the rates enough that we were gaining in the reserve. We're spending
Right.
out of it for a portion, but We're not.
So why don't Jason and Don, why don't you guys meet and really go through this in detail and then present to us at the next meeting if you're comfortable what your recommendation is?
Yeah, we'll focus just on this third option and make it what we think is the best option.
Right, because I've gone through, like I said, I mean, Jason and I met last week. We spent a couple hours together, and I'm really comfortable with what he put together and what we talked about for the breakdown of operating. I also looked at all our debt service, our CIP, layered that in, took a look at what we could use some retained earnings for. So between those two, I'm really comfortable with where we're at and what we need. And then it's just a matter of really me understanding the rate side and what Jason's proposing for the alternatives and how that kind of works out each fiscal year for me to be on board to say, yeah, I'm in agreement with that, and then we can go forward. Again, not that it's my say that dictates it, but I know I just want to make sure that I'm comfortable with it too.
Well, we'd like an extra pair of eyes, but also did we take into consideration the renewal of the contract with Linden Ponds?
No. We just assumed that the cost would stay the same. I got to go back through that again with Brenda on that revenue. In here is an assumed 3% increase, which is what it has been on average over the past 5 years. But what I need to determine, there's two variables when you look at Linden Pond. We increase the rate on how much they get charged every year, but then there's the variable of how much water they use. So I got to make sure that we're projecting those two things independent of each other and make sure that that number is correct.
Well, I know it's very difficult to do that because remember, well, you weren't here, but we had that summer when they had the issue with their air conditioning system.
Yeah, I
and
was
they
here.
had a lot of water. Were you here then?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I don't know how they are going to be doing in their build out because they want to have that rehab center, and that would be taking up a lot more water than a normal residential. The other thing too is, are we looking at the expansion of rental space on our water tanks? Because we were looking at T-Mobile. Whatever happened to that? Are they possibly coming on? Would that be adding, well, it's not that much, but it's still more income.
I follow up with them probably every 2 months at this point, and no one responds.
I would say leave that out for now until we actually get a contract, and then we can adjust that going forward.
Yeah, well, okay, we will, but I'm just looking to see where we have other potentials of something else coming in.
I think you don't want to focus on the small things, Lee, because that
No,
ends
you don't, but I'm just saying, but
if we have more money come in, that's a good
That's
thing,
good.
not a bad thing.
well, no, what I'm saying is we are looking at small increases rather than, okay, if we do this, we're static. That's basically what I'm saying. But the other problem we have here before our next meeting, we should be doing our budget, correct, Don?
Yeah, I actually got to send that guidance out to you. I talked to Chris, and since water and sewer doesn't really have the same economic potential impacts from COVID as our general fund budget, we actually pushed out the due date for when the enterprise fund stuff is due. So let me, I was going to email that today, but I got caught up in a bunch of meetings. So we're looking to have the enterprise fund stuff to us, I believe January 22nd.
But Lee, those numbers have to be put in here. Whatever you're going to project for a budget, we projected increases in here in the budget. If you're going to change those, then we have to change this, and it may affect the rates. So we have to be sure that moving forward, we kind of agree that every year you're going to do this and not sit down and like you renegotiate what happens. It's gotta be, this is the numbers at some point. And
Oh, no, I realize that, Jason, but what I'm saying is we have to decide whether or not we're going with A, B, or C to determine what we're going to use as a basis for the budget. So even if we just look at the next year, whatever plan we choose to use as a basis for the budget, that is, what we're presuming we're going forward with.
Yeah, you're right, Lee. Yeah, and I think what the good part of it is Jason broke it down into how we budget anyway. So we started layering in our projections. So we kind of have based on last year's budget or FY21, we kind of have a preliminary FY22 already. So just a matter of you guys taking a look at it and seeing if you're in agreement with it. So I guess ultimately making that deadline should not be an issue at all.
Okay, no, because I just want to make sure that we can do that. Even if I was thinking if we went with one of the plans and just for whatever was projected for next year without any other little tweaks for subsequent years, that we could base our budget on that. Because
the other
it
one
seems
too
as
is
though you're pretty well set for FY22.
I apologize. I got a note that I need to deal with something. And I will be back, but I have to leave at least for a little while. Just a kid thing. Okay, thanks.
The one thing I would note is we technically could according to this at least, get through the next 2 years without the increase. So if you'd be basically saying we're going to balance the budget if we don't get a rate increase by taking money out of retained earnings.
Well, no, I don't want to do that because that would be 3 years without any type of rate increase.
No, I'm saying if the rate increase doesn't, in order to go to town meeting and say, here's our budget, our one budget, it's either we get a rate increase or some portion of the money may come out of retained earnings.
Well, let's meet Jason and take a look at this.
Okay.
I agree with you, Lee. So again, we did some projections for expenses. I think one thing to your point would be to know based on if something didn't happen, where would that rate stand? Because I know at one point that capital recovery charge changed over a number of years. I guess if we didn't get a rate,
are we planning on keeping the?
Is there any change in our rates anyway? Does that make sense?
What did you say,
Yeah,
Don?
but the other problem though too is, Don, we are going to be going out for more borrowing.
Yeah.
So we cannot maintain a static capital recovery charge.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, that capital recovery, I don't know what you guys are going to want to call it.
If you're going to call it a capital recovery charge, we need to know now because it's going to change how we do these rates.
And I just don't know if that makes sense because it's going to continue. So it'll be called capital recovery charge, but we'll change it each year to be in line with our capital improvement plan. Is that what is being proposed? I just feel like that's a lot of changes each year based on what actually happened.
No, I thought that the increases brought into an approximation of what we would be spending in capital over the next 10 years, presuming X amount of it is going out for borrowing. And that's why I think we should change it to capital, what did we say? Capital stabilization or capital improvement?
Capital improvement.
Yeah.
Or sustainability.
Because I think that would be better because we are going to be doing quite a bit of improving because we'll be doing, people will notice that we're doing Elm Street. Absolutely. Even though we're not borrowing for it, but it's, part of the improvements we're doing. And unfortunately, we probably should be coming out with statements about what actually has to be done in the town because I noticed on Facebook, people every now and again put up, oh, look at the water, blah, blah, blah. And some former town officials have come out with statements like, oh, yeah, we basically improved and replaced almost all the infrastructure, which we didn't do.
If I can I just want to apologize. I'm sorry to interrupt, Lee. I just want to let everyone know my apologies. I've got to go. After having one of my kids already having to quarantine and gotten through that, I just got a text that 2 of my other kids have to quarantine. So I've got to go deal with that now.
Also, I just wanted to point out this meeting was scheduled from 3:30 to 4.
Right.
So
all right, I apologize. I will, I'm gonna be signing off.
Good luck, John.
Okay,
Thank you.
John,
John.
before you sign off,
Bye.
just quick, do you have any idea about which plan you like, A, B, or C?
I think I'm gonna go with Jason and Don's recommendation. I think that we focus on C.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Good luck with the children.
Thank you.
So, I actually have a pretty hard stop at 4:30 myself.
Okay, we have 2 minutes.
When,
Well-
when is the proposed next meeting? Just so I can kind of get in my mind like a time frame of meeting with Jason and going through some of these numbers.
Let me send an email out tomorrow morning first thing, because they were talking about doing it next week.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know what the school plan is for vacation, so I was presuming maybe by the 18th we have to have it, unless we could have it maybe the 21st or 22nd. I don't know what plans are.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm fluid.
Well, I'll send an email out tomorrow. I know, there's a new thing with the Zoom meetings, so I know I can't use Tuesday morning because Sewer's using that, and we're using a combined account now. So, I'll send one out. I know what's available for next week and, see what, Steve and John are available for, and Dawn.
Sounds good
Okay.
to me.
I'd rather get it done before Christmas week.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
So, so I'll send that out in the morning.
Okay.
okay. And then can we just have a little consensus here that we will be focusing on alternative C rather than anything else? Steve,
Yeah.
what is your,
Yes. Yes.
okay. I don't know if we can make a formal motion with that because John is gone, or we
Well,
can.
just, why don't you wait until, we have the next meeting when it really becomes formal.
Okay, well, I mean, instead of trying to do numbers in 3 different scenarios.
So,
No, we'll just focus. I mean, that's just, we don't work on the other ones.
Yeah, just focus on, one plan. Because I thought that was the purpose of this meeting.
correct.
Okay, so we're going to focus on Plan C. And it's 4:30. I make a motion to close the Water Department meeting at 4:30.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, for all your time today. I think it was productive.